Thanks for coming to Discovery class. Pour yourself a coffee and sit down and get comfortable. Before I start, I have a little housekeeping chore I want to tell you about. You'll notice in the top of my head, in the last 2 months, there's been a growth that's been developing there. And I went to the doctor this week, and it's a tumor. And it is malignant. And I'm going in tomorrow to have it removed at the South Calgary Hospital. Now, so you're not going to be embarrassed staring at that thing all day with a walnut on the top of my roof. If you don't mind, I brought my toque, and I'm going to put it on. Now remember, I was raised as a little boy to be a gentleman. We never wore a hat in church, in school, or in somebody's house. I could wear it in the hen house or the barn, but I couldn't wear it in those other places. Well, I'm going to wear my toque, and that's sort of going to be my cover-up, and I hope you'll forgive me. So there I look, and if I look strange, don't be concerned, because it's quite normal. All right, let's go to work. Robert E. Emmons, in his book, Thanks, How Practicing Gratitude Can Make You Happier, says the following. Grateful people experience high levels of positive emotions such as joy, enthusiasm, love, happiness, and optimism, and that the practice of gratitude as a discipline protects that person from the destructive impulses of envy, resentment, greed, and bitterness. Now this week, my wife had a birthday, and she turned 80. I gave her a birthday card, and I said to her, Mary, your birthday present is coming. And I told her I was going to build 2 barn doors for our back vestibule. Now don't start laughing, because if you see our back vestibule, it's got a 9-foot ceiling. It has shelves all the way up the side, and in it, there are hooks for my coat and hat. And there are shelves that we put on our recycling. But Mary's always thinks that it's messy. Now, I don't think it's messy, but what do men know? So I said to her, I'll cover that up with you by putting 2 barn doors. They're like 2 pocket doors that slide side by side. And I did. And I got them all done. And they're heavy. They're 3 feet wide, each of them. And they're 7 feet high. Now in the bottom, there's a flange that sticks up, and in the bottom of the doors, there's a channel that slides through that little flange, and that keeps the door from doing this. However, when you put it into the ground, into the floor, I had to go through tile, and I didn't have a drill that goes through tile. So I went to the little local hardware store, and there's a gentleman down at the back who works in customer service, and they say he's really good at home repairs. So I asked him, I said, here's my problem. I need to have a hole drilled through this tile, and it has to be the size of my pen, I guess. And what have you got? Oh, he says, I can fix you up. So he took me down an aisle, and he showed me some bits. And this one bit that he showed me on the end, it was a carbide tip. It looked like a little spade. And he said, this is what you use. Now he said, it's going to get very hot on the bottom. So you have yourself a little cup of water with a straw and put the water into the tip so that it doesn't get hot, because you're going to see it steaming. So I bought it and away I went. Well, on the way home, I said to myself, I bet that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's never done that before. Why would he tell me that? Well, I got home and I got the bit, put it in my drill, and away I went and I did just as he told me. Class, I'm telling you, that thing went down through that heavy tile and it didn't split. And the bolt went in, the flange was prepared, the door swung, and my job was finished. I was so happy I got in the car and I went down to Tim Hortons and I drove through the drive-through and I picked him up a little box of assortment of 20 Timbits along with a tall coffee, and I took it down to the hardware store. And I said to the man, I said, there's a story in the scripture about our Lord who had 10 lepers, and he healed them all of their leprosy, but only one came back to say thanks. I looked at him and I said, I'm the leper. You've healed me, and I've come back to say thanks. And I handed him his gift. He looked at me and he said, I've been in this business a long time. I've never had anybody pull a trick just like you did. Well, class, that's going to be our class today. I'm going to take you into the Old New Testament, and I'm going to show you that there's a wonderful story in Jesus' ministry. And that's going to be our study. It's found in the Gospel of Luke, and he's the only gospel writer that tells this story, the healing of the 10 lepers. It's not in Matthew, it's not in Mark, and it's not in John. Only Luke tells about it. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem with his disciples. The Passover is drawing near, and so is the crucifixion. Let me read you the story as found in Luke chapter 17, beginning at verse 11, and there's only 9 verses. Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. And as he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. And they stood at a distance, and they called out in a loud voice, Jesus, have pity on us. When he saw them, he said, go and show yourself to the priests. Well, here these 10 guys, they leave Jesus and they're going over the hill. And I can hear them saying to each other, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Why is he asking us to go see the priest? We asked him if he'd have mercy on us. Verse 15, as they were going, the scripture says they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back praising God in a loud voice, and he threw himself at Jesus' feet, and he thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner who was healed? And then he said to him, rise up, go. Your faith has made you well. The story of the healing of these 10 lepers isn't very long. As I told you, it's only 9 verses. Jesus is traveling along the border with Samaria and Galilee when these 10 lepers call out to him. Now, Jesus is coming down from the north. He's been up in the Galilean area, and he's traveling through the area of Samaria. And that's significant because Jews considered Samaritans to be half-breeds. Samaritans were Jews who had intermarried with people of different people's groups, not Jews. And so they were no longer full-blooded Jews. And this caused all kinds of tension for years and years. 2 groups of people who hated each other. In verse 12, Jesus, entering a certain village, there he met 10 men who were lepers who stood afar off. Now, you don't come near a leper. You're permanently quarantined. The disease, something like our coronavirus 19, very contagious. Lepers lived outside the towns and the villages in leper colonies. Leprosy is a dreadful disease. It destroys the body's nervous system. It simply causes you not to be able to feel anything. Leprosy causes the whole body to go numb. When someone is blind, they can't see. If somebody's deaf, they can't hear. But when someone has leprosy, they just can't feel. A leper could be cutting vegetables for supper and would accidentally cut off his finger, and he wouldn't know it because he had no feeling. Sometimes a leper would be sleeping beside the fire. He'd roll over too close to the fire, and he'd burn his foot off without even waking up. In the extreme cold, a leper would freeze his fingers and toes, and he would never know about it. Now, these 10 lepers, they met Jesus, verse 12, and they stood at a distance. If you are afflicted by this disease, you must remember that you're cast off from the rest of society. You live in a garbage heap, a landfill. No contact with former friends, no contact with your former family. No doubt these 10 men were hideous to look at. One was missing an ear. Another was missing a leg. One was missing fingers. Another was missing his toes. And you stood away from anyone and you shouted. And he did, unclean. Unclean, back sheath is the Hebrew word. Stay away from me. Now, all lepers developed a very loud voice. All of them. Doesn't matter if they were young, old, male, female, didn't matter. You screamed when somebody came near you to tell them to stay away because of who you are. Standing at a distance was something else as they shouted, Jesus, would you have mercy on us? Verse 13. No doubt they had heard of Jesus' healing because his reputation had spread all over Palestine. They had heard that Jesus was the Son of God who could do miraculous things. So what does Jesus do in our story? When he saw them, he said, go show yourself to the priests. Did you notice what he didn't say? If you show yourself to the priests, you'll be healed. He didn't say that. He doesn't promise them anything. He just tells them, go show yourself to the priests. Well, in that day, priests in that society were public Victorian nurses. They had the power of a public health worker. If they gave you a clean bill of health, you were no longer unclean, and you could go back into society. In verse 14 it says, so it was that as they went, they were cleansed. In other words, as they were going, they were healed. Can you imagine the sheer joy that they must have felt when that came upon them? Outcasts, no hope, no future, nothing to look forward to. And then suddenly they have their lives back. They can go home. They now have their friends back. They have their family back. Their girlfriends back. They get their passport back. They can cross into another nation. They can go to a restaurant. They can even go back to church. They can go to the synagogue. They could even kiss their wife again. They could play with their children. They were cleansed. Now comes the heart of my message. Verse 15. And one of them, when he saw that he was healed, he returned with a loud voice, and he said thanks to Jesus. Statistically, this story is really true to form because studies have shown us that only 10% of our society ever says thanks. When you serve others, you may find that it's a thankless task. There was a wealthy grandfather that had 10 grandchildren, and it was his custom every Christmas to give them a gift. Well, he gave them a gift every Christmas, but he noticed that when he would give them a gift, very few of them ever said thanks. So on this particular Christmas, he wasn't going to give them a thing, he was going to give them a card. So in the card, he said something very personal as he wrote it. He told them how pretty their blue eyes were. He told them how nicely they had finished their music lessons. On another one, he said, I understand you're going into medicine. I'm going to be so proud of you as a grandpa that you're going to be a doctor. And on he went. You've got a driver's license. I hear you've never had a ticket. You must be a wonderful driver. Well, you know what I mean. So here were these 10 cards going to 10 grandchildren, but in the center he put $1,000, 10 $100 bills. And at the bottom of his little letter, of his little squib, he said, "Now, if you read this sentence and you come back to Grandpa and you say thanks, I'm going to give you double what's in this card." Do you know how many came back and said thanks to Grandpa? Not one. He gave his cards, they took the money, they threw the card away, and they went and spent their Christmas card. Well, Luke 17, verse 16 is probably the very same. He fell down on his face at his feet, giving him thanks. He was a Samaritan, despised because he was a Samaritan, but he was also despised because he was a leper. But only one came back to say thanks for being healed. Did you watch the U.S. inauguration last week? I did. Did you notice a little girl, 22 years old, who was an African American? She came and she had on that beautiful yellow winter coat, and on her head she had that beautiful red bandana. Do you remember that? Do you know what her name was? Her name was Amanda Gorman. She's what I call the Samaritan girl on stage at the inauguration. She was going to tell the American people and all of those on stage the hill that she'd like to climb. She was born with a severe speech impediment. She stuttered. She worked and worked at her handicap because she wanted to one day be able to speak in public so they wouldn't laugh at her. She was very highly concerned about pronunciation. She was aware of sonics and the whole auditory experience. She wanted to do it right because she couldn't do it right. She worked and worked and worked until finally she did get it right. She's a student today at Harvard University in sociology. Skinny little black girl, descended from the slavery, from her ancestors. She was raised by a single mother whose dream one day was to become president of the United States. This little girl talking about the hill she's going to climb. Amanda Gorman's speech was only 5 minutes long, but her entire message was simply, "Thank you, America, for letting you be my home." Somehow, she said, we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but it's simply unfinished. We left our gaze not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We lay down our arms so we can reach our arms out to someone else to hug them. We seek harm to none, but harmony for all. And then she even quoted scripture. She said in the scripture, it says that we can envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. That's the promise, the hill we climb, she said. One thing is certain. If we merge mercy with might, and might with right, the Lord becomes our legacy in charge of our children's birthright. I like that. In verse 18 of Luke 17, so Jesus answered and said, were there not 10 lepers that were cleansed? You came back, but where are the other 9? Were not any of them found to return to give glory to God except you, the foreigner? Jesus asked, why did only this one come back to me to say thanks? Where are the other 9? Where's that foreigner, the Samaritan, the only one who returned? Well, do you want to know where I think the other 9 lepers were? And wondering what they were doing? I think I know. One waited to see if the cure was real. One waited to see if it would last. One said he would see Jesus later. One decided that he had never had leprosy. One said that he would have gotten away and gotten well anyway. One gave glory to the priests when they got to the synagogue. One said, oh, well, Jesus really didn't do anything, did he? Another one said any rabbi could do what he did. And finally, one said, I was already getting better anyway, wasn't I? But the Samaritan, overwhelmed with gratitude, could not keep himself from doing what he knew life demanded. Thank the one who had made him whole. Obedience springs from a grateful heart. So he returned to Jesus to thank him, and look at what it says in verse 19. And he said to him, arise, go your way. Your faith has made you well. Can you imagine how the leper felt at that moment? Now completely physically well. The cancer of leprosy is gone. You go your way, said Jesus. You can now live among us. You don't have to ever go back to that leper colony again. You're free. You don't even have to shout anymore. You don't have to worry about what people are going to think. They don't have to stay away from you. Go. I want you to enjoy your life. Hank Aaron died this week. Do you know who Hank Aaron was? For over 23 years, he was the right fielder of the Atlanta Braves in baseball. He beat Babe Ruth's home run record. He was inducted into baseball's Hall of Fame. It's been said that Henry Aaron was one of baseball's greatest players. He was an African American, batted right-handed. Babe Ruth batted left-handed. Hank was not a big man. He was thin, he was gangly, but he had a powerful wrist. And just with a flick of the bat, the ball would sail out of the park. His batting average was over 300 for over 20 years. He hardly ever struck out. His bats were scarred within only a half an inch of the sweet spot on every bat that he got, and he got 8 new bats every year. He still holds the record for the most runs batted in the American League and the National League. Over 20 times, he was the National League All-Star for right fielders. His idol growing up was Jackie Robinson, the first black man to enter the Major League Baseball with the Brooklyn Dodgers. Let me tell you about Hank Aaron. This is why I like him. Henry Aaron was a Christian. He was raised in a black family in Mobile, Alabama. In the South, very poor. His family was penniless. They were segregated. The Ku Klux Klan would come down his street when he was outside playing baseball with his pals, and his mother would scream at him, "Henry, come now!" And he'd run in the house, and his mother would make him hide under the bed because he was afraid of being shot. All his life, Henry Aaron was belittled by whites because he was black. He was ridiculed and he was reviled. But as a Christian, how did he treat others? He had a wonderful habit. Do you know what it was? No attack, no defense. So badly wrong, so mistreated, as he approached Babe Ruth's home run record. It wasn't fun for him being in right field for the Atlanta Braves. Do you know why? People threw rocks at him, and they threw beer bottles at him while he was out in right field, dangerously coming close to his head. He entered the stadium dressed in disguise to protect himself. He slept in a different hotel from the rest of the team for his own safety. He refused to let ignorance and bigotry stop him from sharing his innermost thoughts and his views as a Christian man. Hate mail used to arrive in threats at his house. His wife Billy and their 5 children, they had to have security guards surround the house and attend the children to and from school just to protect them What did it do for Henry as he was approaching the Babe Ruth record? He was the same. He was the same Henry on the field and off the field. He never refused a child's autograph. Ken Burns, the renowned documentary filmmaker, said this of Henry. Hank Aaron was not only one of baseball's greatest players, but also a remarkable hero whose perseverance and forbearance in the face of unspeakable racism is a testament to his Christian character. So said Ken Burns. Hank Aaron spoke with thanksgiving in his heart, and when it was so much easier and comfortable to not say anything, he continued to speak. You and I were lepers. Jesus has redeemed us. He's healed us. He's made us whole. He's promised us that we will never become lepers again. Now he tells us to serve him. And I want you to know living in this pandemic isn't fun. It isn't fun for you. It isn't fun for me. You're stuck inside. Some of you now have the virus. Ruth Olhauser, one of ours, she's 93 years old. She's in a care home up there in the northwest of Calgary, in Scenic Acres, and she now has the virus. Pray for Ruth. Lovely Christian lady. It's tough being thankful when our world is in such a mess. Let me tell you the story about someone who was thankful all his life. And he really had no right to be, but he was. And like the Samaritan leper, and Amanda Gordon and Hank Aaron, they all came from very humble beginnings, and so did this man. This man wasn't any different. He was a Christian. He left his remarkable legacy, and he became very, very famous as a composer of music. His name was Ludwig van Beethoven. Although Beethoven's music was beautiful, Ludwig, as a person, as a man, really wasn't. His friends say that he was short, he was swarthy, he was solidly built, he was a bit clumsy, certainly awkward, but rather homely, and he had pockmarks on his face. But they did mention kindly that he had a beautiful mane of hair, and he had a brilliant whiteness to his teeth. Beethoven was the son of a drunkard. His dad didn't give him the time of day. He grew up in abuse, privation, from his earliest years, and you wouldn't recognize him as anyone that was going to become anything when he grew up. But friends saw something in him. They nurtured him, and they saw a discernment and an influence that was going to change his life, because even though he had a volatile temper, underneath there was evidence of a genuine heart. Beethoven, being a Christian and a disciple of the Lord, his whole life was marked with thankfulness. And at the age of 29, on the threshold of success, he wrote this note to his brother: "My music will only be used in the service of the poor." Beethoven never married. He was a bachelor all his life. And at the age of 26, he started losing his hearing. And it came on so rapidly that at the age of 29, he was stone deaf, just as deaf as a post. If you listen to his music, I'll give you an example. Take the Heilige Stadt Overture. Is that ever a beautiful piece of music? Now picture Beethoven, he's deaf. He's going down to this big park in the center of Salzburg, and he's watching what's going on in the park. And he begins to write his overture. And he sees the flute as a means to show that that shepherd boy over there in the hill is looking after his sheep. And there that's played. And then he sees the piccolo in the orchestra, and the piccolo is going to tell the story of the birds singing in the tree. And then he sees the clopping along of the horses in the carriage, and there he has the kettle drums and the bass fiddles showing the movement of those horses. And then he sees the lovers in the lane, and he has the violins tell the string of their walk. And then he sees the ducks walking down to the walk, and there he has the oboe telling the story of the walking of these ducks. And then he has the cymbals at the end. They clash, and that's the thunderstorm that's coming up. Now remember, Beethoven never heard a word of that. He wrote it in music, but he could never hear it. In spite of all his negative feelings, he also discovered his unshakable strength and certainty. He commented to a friend, "It's impossible to leave this world until I have brought forth all that I feel within me." Isn't that a great statement? What was inside? Well, music. It was written for the human heart, and all his music, I don't care if you're listening to his sonatas, any of his work, it was full of thanksgiving. He didn't write it for the classroom. He didn't write it for scholars. He didn't write his music for critics to pull it apart. When you hear his masterpieces, what you're seeing is right into a man's heart. He was not only a genius, but he was a human. He was a man. One day Beethoven was told of a mother who had lost her only child. And it was a little girl, and she was overcome with grief. Hearing of the child's death, Beethoven couldn't bring himself to approach her in her sorrow. After many days and not knowing what to do or what to say, he finally invited her to his house. And when she came and sat down, or when he came and sat down at the piano, he said, "I can't speak to you with words. Words fail me. I will play for you. The only thing I can give you from my heart to your heart are tones. I've lost my hearing. You've lost your only child. Let me enter into your sorrow as I play this music, and it's just for you." No words were spoken after that. He played to her for a whole hour. She sat mutely listening. Tears began to stream down her face. She left his studio and sometime later said to a friend, "He told me that day everything I needed to know. Where my child was now, he told me where she was. Where my life could start anew, he showed me my new beginning. His music was the hanky that dried my eyes. He lifted me from despair and gave me acceptance. He showed me how to be thankful again. I didn't think I would ever do that in my lifetime." Well, Beethoven expressed, I think, the wordless dialogue between a composer and his creator. His last words that he uttered when he died were these: "In heaven, I shall hear again." I think you and I, we're all deaf. Someone asked Beethoven, "Where did you get your music?" He replied, "I get my music straight from God." That's where thankfulness really comes, class. Straight from God. I hope you found in our class today, as you've come, a little happiness. And if you did, I want you to leave the classroom and leave your coffee cup, and I want you to go and show it to somebody. Would you do that for me? Okay, as our class comes to an end, I want to give you something from the sunny side of the street. I always like to leave my class with a smile on the face. Now, my father, he grew up and he had very little formal training. He had to quit school in grade 6, go home as the oldest in the family and look after the farm because his dad wasn't well. And Dad had a lot of proverbs. I don't know where he got them, maybe folklore, maybe he made them up, but he'd say something like this: you can't change the taste of the water in the well by painting the handle on the pump. Here's one that he gave me before I left home, after I'd come out of seminary. He said, Ron, remember this. Never get into a squirt contest with a skunk. If you do, you'll lose. And if you do, you're going to smell just like him. I didn't know what he meant. But now, after 80 years and I look back, I think I know what he meant. Do you know, I've had skunks in all the churches I've served. Every committee and board that I've ever been appointed to, I've always found a skunk. I've had skunks as professors at university. But you know, I got along with all of them. Do you know why? I never got into a squirt contest with them. Now, my father, he didn't use the word squirt. He used another word, but I can't repeat it in class. I'll see you next week. And when you come back, this thing that's on my head, it's going to be removed. And I'm going to have a patch on it. So if you want to call me Patch Adams, that'll be just fine. See you next week. Thanks for coming today.